Okay, so my refutation speech is going to be on Zach's primitive fact speech, which was affirmative action programs in college admissions are in practice discriminatory towards students. To remind you, Zach's three claims were current affirmative action programs still favor particular races or genders. College admissions, like employment opportunities, are zero-sum games, and affirmative action negates the merit in an application when applied to an admittance. During Zach's speech, he gave us a definition of what affirmative action is. So to remind you guys, affirmative action is, in the U.S., an active effort to improve employment or educational opportunities for members of minority groups and for women. And this definition came from Encyclopedia Britannica. So basically, it's common knowledge that white people are not a part of the minority group. So to reiterate Zach's claim, he is saying that affirmative action is discriminatory towards white students. So the two main points I'm going to talk about today are the stats of the racial demographics in some elite colleges across the U.S., and the case of Fisher versus University of Texas, a point that Zach brought up but didn't get into. So I'm going to use that to prove that affirmative action fails to be discriminatory towards students, specifically white students. My first point is about the stats of some of the elite colleges in America. Whites are more represented than any other race. In Stanford, 45.5% of student population are white, 22.9% are Asian, 11.4% are Hispanic, and 3.8% are black. In Harvard, 42% of the student population is white, 20% is Asian, 8% is Hispanic, and 5.28% are black. In Yale, sit down for this one, guys, 71% of students are white. 21% are Asian, 11% are Hispanic, and 10% are black. This number is a little over 100% because some students self-reported more than one race, and they just counted it once in each category. So all these stats come from each of the school's websites, so all the .edus. My next point is to debunk one of the examples that Zach used in his claim. To support his claim that actually does not provide the right backing that was needed to prove his point. So Zach briefly talked about the case of Fisher versus the University of Texas, and he used this to support his first claim, which was the affirmative action program favor particular races or genders, and he told us basically the decision of what the court came to, which was they were in the right because they were allowed to use race as a factor in the admission process. What that Zach failed to do was give us details into the case. So basically, I'm going to tell you what the case is about to prove that what he used was actually harming his claims. So Abigail Fisher sued University of Texas because she believes they denied her into the university solely because she was white. However, again, if we look into the demographics of the student population, Abigail's race, which is white, is more represented in the school than any other race. 41% of the school population are made up of white students. Hispanics make up 20%, Asians make up 11%, and blacks make up 4%. Another example to debunk this example is in Texas in 1999, the state legislature passed a law that allowed the school to accept in-state high school seniors who graduated in the top 10% in the university. So the school seen major differences in what races were being accepted into the school compared to the state's population. So the university decided to modify its race-neutral admissions policy. So they kept the top 10% into the process, and the remainder of the students' race would be a factor into the admission process. Abigail was not in the top 10%. So thus she competed with others that were not in the top 10% as well, and she was denied. Some food for thought, Abigail was actually an average student. As students of university, we know we have to be exceptional and outshine others to prove to the university that how we could be a good asset to the community. According to an article by Nicole Hannah-Jones that was titled "What Abigail Fisher's Affirmative Action Case Was Really About," she states that the University of Texas actually offered Abigail admission to the university her sophomore year if she went to a school in Texas her freshman year and maintained a 3.2 GPA. Out of spite, she denied it. And another thing that is failed to mention is that about 168 students that were Black and Latino who had grades as good as hers or better were also denied admission. So no, average Abigail, you are not denied because of your race, you were denied because of your merits.
All right, well, you started us off pretty clearly with a discussion of what the advocate's claims were, reminding us of what the main points were. So we've got a good idea that's going on there. You don't respond to all those points individually, although the first couple of points, there is some material in your argument that addresses those issues. You kind of agree with this definition of affirmative action. Basically, though, the argument then becomes, how do we measure affirmative action, or how do we see when discrimination is occurring? And when you point out that whites are not a part of a minority community or group, and in fact that they make up a large percentage of the students at these various colleges that are supposedly using discriminatory techniques, that seems to suggest that that there's certainly not a policy designed to exclude whites. The question is, are whites excluded because of attempts to include other groups? And I think that's kind of where the dispute is going. And on the first point, it's just interesting background information, which kind of diminishes the need to worry about whites being discriminated against, since they already are a substantial percentage of the student population at those universities that you mentioned. The example that you go after is the one that the advocate used, the Fisher case in Texas, at the University of Texas. And what you did was you kind of went after the specifics of Abigail Fisher herself and the circumstances. You pointed out legitimately that University of Texas has a policy to allow anybody finishing in the top 10% of their high schools to get admission into the university system, and that she did not fit into that category, that she was competing not with that group of people, but with students in a lower tier, and that students in a lower tier in categories that she was in when it came to grade level or performance, there were a number of blacks and Hispanics who were also denied admission under the same circumstances, to suggest that it is not really discriminatory in this particular situation. I thought that was a pretty effective tool there. I like the way that you express it. At the end, of course, average Abigail, you call her. I'm not exactly sure if those are your words, if you're quoting somebody, but it's got an effective, persuasive punch to add to the argument at the end. All right, thank you.